What we need is here. 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 Today we continue a series of Jesus' glory and divinity while maintaining his full humanity being revealed. We've heard of the arrival of the Magi at Epiphany, when salvation is offered and made available to all, regardless of race or ethnicity. We've heard of Jesus' baptism, when the heavens are torn, a dove alights on Jesus, and a voice from above says that Jesus is God's Son. And today we come to Jesus' first miracle, where he and the disciples attend a wedding. Maybe Jesus knew someone at it. Maybe the newly called disciple, Nathanael, knew someone. So they're at the wedding, and Kellerur, the wedding feast, runs out of wine. Maybe it runs out of wine because Jesus and his vagabond group of disciples hadn't contributed to the community pot by way of a wedding gift. Mary, whom John only refers to with the honorific Mother of Jesus, shares with Jesus that they're out of wine. Perhaps she's asking him to do something about it. Perhaps she's just letting him know as an update, like when you run out of wings at a Super Bowl party. There are lots of ways to read Jesus' reply, but none of them is meant as rude or belligerent. Jesus could possibly have merely been saying, "We're not the hosts here. This isn't our problem." And then says, "It's not time for my glory to be revealed. My hour has not yet come." Nevertheless, Mary tells the servants to do what Jesus says. This week, we got an email from a congregant. I know that the official channel for this is closed, but I had a lovely conversation with a friend this week about St. Hilda St. Patrick Episcopal Church. She learned that I attend SHSP and shared that she and her husband really like walking labyrinths. They have a labyrinth finder website that they use, and they discovered us via that website. In the last week or two, they drove over from Mill Creek to walk our labyrinth. She was very complimentary about how lovely it was and what a nice garden we have around it. I think we've gotten all the pledges for 2022 that we're probably going to get. But the official channels for noticing and sharing stewardship stories is not closed. Please keep sharing those year-round, all the time, as our stewardship conversation moves from a month in the winter or fall to conversations between ourselves, God, and the church all the time. Since I started at St. Hilda St. Patrick, we've been intentional about modeling and living as stewards, like the person who tastes the wine Jesus makes from the water. We've modeled and lived as stewards who care for one another, who care for those in our community, stewarding the commons of this church and this little patch of unincorporated Snohomish County. As we've lived in this model of stewardship, we haven't set a fundraising goal or given budget completion updates. We've asked you to be in conversation with God and your family unit and to think about proportional giving. Giving not necessarily a flat rate monthly or quarterly, but looking at your income and dedicating a percentage of it to God's work through the church. The Bishops' Committee is meeting today to approve a budget for this year. I've lost more sleep over this church and our budget this week than I have in my last 2 years here, and that's with an unplanned global pandemic. Undoubtedly, the groom of today's wedding at Cana and his close friend who was stewarding the festivities didn't plan to run out. It's not exactly an unplanned global pandemic, but all of us face surprises of their own magnitude at inopportune times. Shock and disappointment are relative. Although Jesus' hour, his glorification, which for John are his crucifixion, death, resurrection, and ascension, this hour is not yet come, Jesus intervenes. The Word made flesh, that light that the darkness cannot overcome, works with what's around and works quietly but gracefully. He directs the filling of stone jars with water. Let's go with the biggest estimate, so about 30 gallons each. And tells the servants to simply dip some out, share it with the steward. This wedding feast has just gone from having no wine to having about 900 bottles available. The steward celebrates the groom for saving the best for last, which is not a human tendency when it comes to opening and sharing bottles of wine. Jesus reveals his true glory, and the disciples continue their journey of believing in him. God, through Jesus, shows the abundance and goodness of God's grace. The wedding party didn't do anything to warrant or earn more wine than they needed, and certainly not wine that is being so celebrated. Jesus just gave it freely so that his disciples and we could believe. There are lots of ways to theologize and allegorize this passage that only appears in John. But as someone in Bible study pointed out this week, when John wants to theologize, John does it. When we just take this text on its face, there's good news of the abundance of God, and that what we need, what God needs to work, is here. The Bishops' Committee is meeting today to approve a budget for this year. I've lost more sleep over this church and our budget this week than I have in my last 2 years here. And that's with an unplanned global pandemic. Like water into wine from 6 stone jars, what we need is here through God. Deaths and moves have changed our situation, but what we need is here. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." Even after we cut the budget to be as tight as we can, there will still probably be a deficit based on current pledges. Dr. King also said, "The contemporary tendency in our society is to base our distribution on scarcity, which has vanished." What we need is here, particularly as we consider our giving in terms of proportions, settling a percentage or part of a percentage to set aside for God, and working toward the biblical standard of a 10% tithe. What we need, both at St. Hilda St. Patrick and in the commons of our area, is here. Even if it's in the portfolios and bank accounts of the billionaires who live in our region, rather than that money being used for sheltering or feeding those who eat from our pantry or sleep at our front door. I've lost sleep over the past week, but I haven't lost infinite hope. Not in the face of this pandemic with all of its twists and turns, and not in the face of planning for this budget. We don't have to try to get blood from turnips when God can get wine from water. Regardless of how the budget shakes out, too, the abundance of God's love can't be counted or measured. Regardless of how much is pledged or given, God's love made manifest in Jesus covers us, wraps us, and comforts us. What we need is here. What we need is here. Amen.